Welcome back from the break. Chuck Muether here, host of Little Manse on the Prairie program, where most of my listening audience go. I made my way back from northwest Iowa, where I attended the wedding of my niece. It was the first time I saw foot washing between the just-named husband and wife, and then after that, a prayer huddle with the wedding party and the parents. But what was really neat, though, was not all the symbolic elements, but ultimately that these kids really love the Lord and want to pursue His will as one united flesh. Also pretty cool was that I could leave the priestly collar home, speaking symbolically, of course, and be totally obnoxious with my two nephews and another niece. So a big shout out to Roberto, Billy, and Trish. I have a playful competition with my big brother John as to who is the fave uncle. And John, once again, even in his absence, still retained 2 of 3. But Billy's in my corner, and we even wrote a song together called I Got Church Tomorrow, I Got Church Tomorrow. Yeah, it's one of those things you had to be there, and even if you were, you would not have been impressed. But this is what happens when a church planter takes a couple of days off. Okay, enough of the silliness. I have not done one of these profiles recently, so I want to play for you a pre-recorded interview with the Reverend Jonathan Shishko, the son of the very respected pulpiteer, the Reverend William Shishko. I had this sit down with the younger pastor Shishko at this year's General Assembly, and I have to say I am completely stoked by these young guys coming into the church. Their passion, discipline, and love for the ministry is infectious. Evangelist Jon Shishko arrived in Queens in August 2011 as an intern with his wife, Lauren. After his ordination in September 2012, he continued to serve alongside of another church planter before taking over the duties at Reformation Presbyterian Church. So let's hear from this member from the
League of Simple Undershepherds.
So, John, your dad was my pastor for just 2 years. He came to Franklin Square, I believe, in 1981, and I left for college soon after that. I remember you as a little guy, and now you are here as a young, enterprising church planter taking on the Big Apple. Tell me about your journey into the ministry.
Sure. I grew up, and my dad says I'm a son of the Manse. That's a way of saying don't let me down, son. But I've actually really have been thankful for that, and at every point, I understand what he means by it in a full sense. There's just, as a child growing up, you don't realize that you're learning at every point. As much as you learn from your parents speaking verbally, you are learning from their example and what they do, how they react, how they respond.
Sure.
And while I don't have the wonderful depth of voice that my father has, and I can't fake it either. There's just the way he conducts himself and responds to situations, thinks through things, studies things, speaks to people, greets people. All of that has become, not just as a pastor, but as a student in seminary, and especially as a father and a husband, that becomes the default. And that's just a tremendous blessing to have that as a default, and to be able to say, I'm thinking and acting these ways because that was the model that was set before me at every point, and I'm just going to be more thankful to God for that. So, as far as seminary, it's fascinating. I apparently, and I know this is true because I see it in writing, in my own handwriting, when I was 5. There was some kindergarten exercise where we had to fill out journals, and one of the questions is, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I wrote, I want to be a pastor. And I guess Satan launched in from that point until I was 19. Completely forgot that I said, and progressively moved towards wanting to be anything except for a pastor. And then it was when I was 19 years old. I remember this moment. I can't tell you when I was converted by God's grace, but I remember the exact time where I said, maybe I should be a pastor. And I was listening to my father's series on infant baptism. It's 22 lessons long. It was on cassette tape. This is actually, believe it or not, before CD and MP3 players had taken over the world. You could still get a cassette player and cassettes, and it was on cassette. So I got a cassette player, and here's the wrinkle. I'm not only listening to it on cassette, but it's a hot summer day. I'm blacktopping a driveway for extra money during college, and I think I listened to 8 of these Christian baptism tapes. And I remember, like, I was getting close to being finished. And I remember thinking, if I enjoy this so much and find it as profitable as I do, maybe I should be a pastor. And I went home, I talked to my dad, and from that point on, it was at every step working with the Franklin Square session. The first member of the session was Elder Montemorano, who's here at the assembly. And they were a terrific session. Proceeded to going under care, worked through which seminary to go to. I was under care of the same presbytery the whole time. It was, by God's grace, invited to come as an intern to Reformation Presbyterian Church, which was a church plant, and still is a church plant. I came back. I immediately went into licensure process, was licensed to preach, and then in December of 2012, I was ordained. I was installed as an evangelist at Reformation Presbyterian Church.
So, John, how was your seminary experience?
Delightful. I loved it. I had spoken with Dr. Curto 5 years before I ended up going to seminary. Greenville Presbyterian Theological Seminary. My dad is an adjunct professor. And between my father and knowing Dr. Curto and Dr. Pipa, and then our presbytery has a number of Greenville grads, John Holst, Ben Miller.
Right.
So it was the one I was the most familiar with, and what happened was I was able to become very familiar with the catalog and the curriculum. And I knew it was a 4-year program, but I talked to Dr. Curto about it, again, 5 years before I actually went. So I was able to study rhetoric and logic and Greek and Hebrew and every class that you could study up for. The upshot is I was able to go for 3 years, and I guess the downside is it took me 5 years to get ready to go. And met tremendous friends. Josh Lyon is my best friend, church best male friend. My wife is my best friend. Love you, honey. But he's a church planner in LA, and I'm a church planner in New York. We got the coast covered. We love it. We talk all the time. We're best of friends. We met before my first day at seminary at Greenville, and so I just have nothing but really good memories about seminary, studying, fellowship, learning the ropes. It was just terrific.
Well, John, in your young career, can you tell me some triumphs and some pitfalls maybe you have already experienced in church planting?
2 joys have been, one is just a tremendous, delightful couple, a lady from Tennessee and a man from Colombia, South America. And, this brother is from a Roman Catholic background, as sincere and genuine as they come. And the question is, I knew she believed he was a Christian because she's a very committed Christian, grew up in the PCA and wouldn't date an unbeliever. But he was a stranger to me. He wasn't a church member, and I knew that was a lot. That's a lot for a Colombian Roman Catholic who's dedicated. He had considered the priesthood, and I had to get to know him. English is his second language. He speaks it very well. I don't speak Spanish as well as I would like to, so just having to get through all of that in this rushed capacity with the oversight of the session and speaking to him and saying, look, I'm the last one that wants to unequally yoke anybody, but this guy, he seems to be speaking the faith, and he's hungry to learn, and more he's understanding why there's a difference between Protestant and Roman Catholic, why we believe that what we believe about church membership, and that all of those things came into, they fell into place so wonderfully under the supervision of the session. People would ask me, like, what do you think about this? I'm like, it's not really what I think about this. The session is aware of this, and we're just working with it. And it was such a lesson of, don't make judgment, go speak to them. I always say, you got to exercise good judgment. Don't be judgmental, exercise good judgment. And that was just such a blessing, and it ended up being my first time I got to marry two people. That was one, and then the other is the triplets I mentioned
that's right.
The other day. I mean, this family, a lot of times in counseling and pastoral situations, someone dug themselves a hole, they backed themselves in a corner, you're trying to get them out because God's grace is so good. This situation, they are going through the trial of their lives on 1,000 fronts: financial, familial, 3 newborn babies, a girl who's 5 and is delightful, and a girl who's 3 and delightful. But it's a family of 4 that went to a family of 7 overnight. They're all girls. To see this family deal with all of these trials, and at every point, they're a model of what it is to see in action what is supernatural, to count it all joy when you fall into various trials. They come to church, they're smiling, they are communicative of what's going on, very open about their need for help. It's been terrific to see the church rally around them, the presbytery rally around them, and just be able to say, like, we're not going anywhere, and everybody's on board. And we thought the third triplet, who they were encouraged over and over to selectively reduce, which means abort. Right. They stuck to their guns about it all and walked by faith and not by sight. And just a month and a half ago, it really looked like she was not long for this world. And the entire congregation was just broken because we've been praying for this girl by name since long before she was born. So just real wonderful to see a family functioning as a family. We got our problems, but we're not a dysfunctional family. We're a functional one with issues that we should work through. So anyway, those are two great. Downside, I think some people know the initial organizing pastor, and a year ago, he had decided that he needed to move on, and it was sudden for us, and it's still difficult. And you have the man that organizes it, gets things started. Everybody is ultimately following Jesus, but following him, and to have him, I believe he was, if not the first, one of the first members of the core group to actually leave. And that was really tough on me. I was his partner 2 years. I think I know him better than anybody else, and I worked so closely with him, and you can't help but think, like, wow, what did I do? Right, even though it's assured us of. So that's been tough. I think we're still getting over it in some ways, and yet we've been so busy. It's kind of, in a good way, a little bit recessed in our thinking.
Well, Pastor Shishko, it will be exciting to see you follow after your dad's footsteps, but even more exciting, seeing you follow the footsteps of Christ as an ordained minister of the Word.
Couldn't be more thankful to be ordained, and I'm very thankful. And I serve in the same presbytery as my dad, but I went through, like I said, I wanted to be a pastor in 2001. I was 19 years old, or 2002, and it took 2002 to 2012. So, and I'm so thankful for that. I couldn't be more thankful for that. I didn't know anything. I had to graduate college. I got married during that time. I worked in New York City during that time. Where I went to college is a mile away from where we meet for worship. I work with people all the time that work in New York City. And I learned so many lessons and go back to that regularly. So.
Well, I want to thank my guest, Evangelist Jon Shishko, operating out of Queens, New York. Thank you, John, for taking time out of your busy GA to speak with me. And that wraps up our Simple Undershepherds segment. After the break, we'll look at the Ukrainian crisis. I have 3 daughters that came from the Nikolaev area, or at least 2 did. One was conceived there as well. And I've got some perspective on that whole business, and we'll look at that just after this message. You're listening to Little Manse on the Prairie on the Be Thou My Vision radio network.